2/3 of people in organizations anonymously are admitting to the fact that they're using other AI tools, say ChatGPT, on their personal devices to conduct work, to get things done for work.
They keep telling us that it's all over for HR. The age of AI is upon us, and that means HR should be prepared to be decimated. We reject that message. The future of HR won't be handed to us. Instead, it'll be defined by those ready to experiment, adopt, and adapt. Future-Proof HR invites these builders to share what they're trying, how it's going, what they've learned, and what's next. We are committed to arming HR with the AI insights to not just survive, but to thrive. Hello and welcome to the Future-Proof HR podcast, where we explore how forward-thinking HR leaders are preparing for disruption and redefining what it means to lead people in an ever-changing world. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, CEO of Cleary. Today's guest is Preston Lewis, SVP, Communications and Consultant at Segal Benz, globally sought after advisor, speaker, and enterprise transformation expert who helps companies solve complex challenges through communication, employee engagement, and design. With over 25 years of experience servicing clients in, I'm just going to name it, but it's pretty much every industry: retail, technology, pharma, healthcare, manufacturing, definitely with working alongside brands that you have heard of: Starbucks, Intel, Roche, Chanel. So everything from bags to coffee to technology. Preston brings a unique lens into what makes HR transformations actually succeed and what holds them back. So in this episode, we're going to explore the shifting expectations for HR and comms leaders and the critical mindset divide that Preston's seeing that's emerging around AI, and how communication, strategy, technology, all these factors coming together to shape the future of work. With no further ado, welcome to the podcast, Preston.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to get invited and continue the conversation.
Tell me about your thoughts about tech adoption, and specifically in HR. And then I think you tell me a little bit about a gap that maybe is widening in mindset. Tell me more about what you're seeing out there.
I think that the first place that we need to go is remind ourselves that what we're experiencing today, whether it's across a whole company or a whole organization or a whole university, organizations of all shapes, sizes, across all industries, is another opportunity to transform how we work using new technology. Yes, the conversation is primarily about technology that's powered by AI and large language models and lots of emerging technology, but primarily AI is the most specific example of things that are changing yesterday that we need to know about. And we need to remind ourselves that fundamentally, whichever function you serve, whether it's IT or in HR or in communications, that this is another change management initiative. This is going to be a multi-year process. And we need to remind ourselves that we're working with human beings and organizations that experience change in a variety of different ways. So that's my first general, want to set the table. That's where we are. I also find it really interesting. I was seeing some data a couple of weeks ago at a conference from a large law firm talking about AI regulation and what, if any, a regulation will be happening at the government level, particularly in the United States, or at the state level. And then within that, we look at specifically the regulation, and surprise, surprise, the easiest thing to regulate is how AI is being applied inside large organizations. Very specifically, some of the most obvious examples are within the HR and communications function. One of my favorite obvious examples are companies that have for years used AI technology to, say, sift resumes. That's the best example. Within that, how do we look at bias that exists within that technology? What's nice about that example is it's very specific. It's very real. It's happening today. It impacts lives, and it impacts very strategic priorities for organizations where a lot of money and funding and resources sit behind some of that technology and how it's being applied. So that's the long answer, but what we are doing today is really taking a close look at how to communicate the context of how emerging technology powered by AI impacts an organization and how it might impact every single individual and job role and function. That's the work that we're doing now. And then, of course, employing our standard change management, change communication methodologies, because, like with many changes we've seen over the decades that I've been working, we need to remember what works.
So that's a great setting of the table because you're right. This is another shift, another change that's been happening for decades, or there's always something like the internet for the first time, or even when fax machines were first introduced, or when you have a new process evolution with management, you're always managing your employment base and you're communicating how this change is going to happen for the organization. And yet, somehow, I guess that people always say this, right? And somehow this time feels different. This is somehow different. I mean, like when, I don't know, mobile phones were introduced into the workplace, you didn't have, like, for the example that you have, right? Like litigation around employment bias introduced because of that particular technology, like coming into the mix. But one thing that has always been true is like people feeling afraid about what this will mean for their job or what they do day to day.
Said it. You said it.
Yeah, I was like, what's different like this time, right? It feels different from your perspective. What's different?
What's different is that it's so obvious that the tasks and that this technology can complete are literally the tasks that people are getting paid to do, or the activities that people are being paid to perform. It's apples to apples. And that's what's, again, amongst many examples, that's really what's happening now. And so let's go through whether we call it the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or we know about just human beings generally, and of course, human beings at work, those core concerns of, am I going to look good or look stupid? I do this whole talk about what does it mean to be more human at work, and what does it mean to build strategy with wired with empathy and really understanding the root concerns that drive people. And again, what we know like human beings is we care about two things: looking good or not looking stupid, and being heard or listened to, like in any good relationship. And of course, we can apply that to work and how important it is to make sure the lines are always open and the feedback loops are working. It's very relevant in the context of change and adopting technology. But to your point, what's different now is that leaders, I'll just again be real specific, whether whichever function you're in, the conversation isn't, oh, look at all this great technology, let's think about how we could use it. The conversation that we're seeing in across all industries, but let's talk about tech companies first. What we have to remember is that particularly with tech companies, they're selling technology to customers. Let's keep it real simple. Being that's the case, the expectations that leaders have in technology companies for how to use technology are different, right? Than say higher ed. This is different expectations for using technology, right? Higher ed isn't selling technology. So inside tech companies, the expectations or the conversations that are happening with HR functions, or say communications functions, or even IT functions are not, look at all this cool stuff and let's think about how we use it. The conversations are, how can we literally do more, be more competitive with less resources? And of course, that's people and budget. So it's a lot about how do we increase engagement, increase performance? How do we increase quality of experience and service and product using AI powered technology? That's so specific. And for some reason, there's this expectation leaders have that it's going to happen really fast and we're going to be really good at it. And it's, again, going to be the same or better than what we're doing now, which is really where the rubber meets the road. We haven't had enough time to really see quality of product, quality of performance, quality of customer experience improve quarter over quarter in a way where we're able to align expectations, if that makes sense, both internally and externally. We're still in the midst of all this. As we know, for example, with AI powered tools and technology, it's not, what are we going to be doing 6 or 9 months from now? It's every 3 months, the strategies for those companies are changing. So you can't plan 6 or 9 months out. We have to plan for now.
Yeah, the expectation setting, that's probably a big piece of this, right? Because on the one hand, vendors, maybe I'm just as much as anybody else, are you're always marketing how amazing it is and how much you can do, and you're falling behind with whatever the tech is. And then leadership or boards are also seeing the flashy headlines and looking to just get everything done yesterday. And then there's also like the people actually like doing the work who maybe don't feel prepared or don't have need time to learn skills. But meanwhile, the technology keeps evolving as well. So the learning skills is hard to keep up. So there is this little bit of a gap, right, between expectations across the board in the market.
Yeah, and that's where, we wonder, why communications leaders are being tasked with facilitating AI technology transformation inside organizations. And of course, as a leader communicator, my perspective is that that does make sense. Like, to your point, we have this thing that we call the trust spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, we have leaders that are very close to making the decisions about how and when to use AI platforms and technology to increase value that they can bring to their organization and to their customers. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have those people that are using the technology every single day. The trust is built and that gap is closed, if you will, only when the feedback loops are open and the leaders are giving permission to fail, giving permission to proactively communicate what's working or what's not working, so that, of course, those leaders are more educated on how to apply and evolve thinking and practice for using AI powered tools and other technologies in general. But, those conversations need to be more often, more active. They need to be structured so that informed decisions can be made by those leaders, and that those people that are those practitioners, if you will, or those people that are in these tools using these bots and apps and systems, that they feel safe and that they feel like when they're able to communicate this technology or this platform or tool or application isn't what we thought it was. It's not working. I'm not able to see the value. They need to feel comfortable saying those things. So far, so good. There's a lot of openness that we're seeing amongst leadership teams for failure and communication, but it does suggest that having structure and process and clear pathways to communicate again what's working and not working, and very specifically in the feedback loops for applying this technology. That's the right work to do right now. So
Mhm.
that's the kind of work that we're doing with other organizations, for example.
So I want to go a little bit deeper on one thing you just mentioned, which is that often comms teams or comms leaders are taking the helm at helping the company define
Mhm.
the AI kind of transformation. So tell me more about that. Like, why does that come about? And
Yeah.
what does that even mean? What are you seeing out there? What does it mean for a company to have an AI strategy and then for a comms leader to help develop that?
Yeah. It's a great question because there's some really important distinctions. First of all, to answer your question, the reason why we're seeing communication teams and functions being tasked with leading the charge for transformation and technology transformation is because we've seen the data decades over decades, like we said in the beginning of this conversation. This isn't new. Communicators know how to manage change. And now leadership teams and organizations are more aware that if you're going to get one thing right to enable transformation, it's communication. So that's why we communication leaders are being tasked with leading this change transformation. However, very importantly, I'm not suggesting, I wouldn't recommend necessarily that only communications are the AI experts, right? And that's the big
Mhm.
distinction. Like they're the change and chance. We are the change and behavior change and process change and business transformation facilitators and advisors, right? But in order to do this right, we also need to create communities of people, expert communities inside our organizations that are more function specific, product, HR, digital workplace. So I think that distinction is really important so that we can continue to do the right work as facilitators of change, communicating effectively throughout that transformation, rather than being tasked with, okay, can you develop a training how to use Copilot inside our
Mhm.
organization. That is not a communications only project. And we're seeing that a lot more. And it's a little scary because I don't think it's setting communicators in particular up to be successful. So that role clarification and that charter being defined is also, again, the work that we're doing now because foundationally, clear roles and responsibilities, within that, a clear sense of timing, clear sense of expectations of what elements of the business are being impacted and why. What audiences are we engaging and why? That's all the stuff that we can help with and facilitate and do. But when it does come to platform or technology specific insight or expertise, that's just a bit of a flag. I like to have remind communicators that it's okay to put those flags up sometimes.
True. In fact, that's usually the way it evolves, right? I guess there's usually either leaders or even individual contributors in different functions who are leveraging AI in different ways or whatever technology in different ways, and it starts to bubble up to become to have little problems that might emerge, or like someone didn't use a tool that was compliant in the right way, or someone used it for a use case or provided data that they should now have, or there's multiple tools that kind of do the same thing, which then lead to choke points cross-functionally as a team is trying to collaborate, and or combined with the strategic leadership decision to say, hey, we really want to be AI focused, or we want to make sure from now on everyone in operations is trained on X, right? Or there's some kind of
Yes.
strategic imperative. That's when you realize there's too many little pain points across the organization because it's a coordination problem, which then makes it clearly home base for a comms or HR function to help.
Yeah. We also have to be careful. It's important to not be naive to the way that human beings work in the context of using AI technology. So, for example, number one, for people that are not open to using AI technology for personal use in our lives, how realistic is it that they're going to see the value in AI technology at work and start putting it into practice today? I mean, really,
Mhm.
right? That's just not how human beings work. Another good example is some of the data that is coming out is highlighting the fact that, and I'm not going to be able to cite the source of data, but I don't think you'll argue, and I will soon if you follow me on LinkedIn. Two-thirds of people in organizations anonymously are admitting to the fact that they're using other AI tools, say ChatGPT, on their personal devices to conduct work, to get things done for work.
Mm.
Because, for example, maybe the licensed Copilot instance inside on their work device isn't getting them what they need fast enough, or getting them isn't as helpful as organizations think it is. Right. And
Right.
that's a perfect example of what I was saying earlier. Some leaders that are close to decisions saying, use Copilot, it's the best, use it for everything, and it's safe.
We've standardized on X, so everyone we have a pilot, we have a license for everyone. So
That assumes it can do everything when we all know it just can't. Having mechanisms in place that illustrate, okay, if you're going to use ChatGPT on a personal device, let's be very realistic about how and when to use that, what to do, what not to do. Because as AI is becoming more pervasive, for those of us that are smart enough to know, of course, we're not going to include, I mean, names, company names, something that will make it recognizable when it's used on external platforms. And we get that, but things happen really fast there. We forget to find and replace that one name, right? Mistakes happen. So I think back to the point about not being naive, we do need to really acknowledge how people, human beings, are using this technology and get ahead of what we know to be true.
yeah, that reminds me of the phrase shadow IT. So it's probably
Mhm.
15 years ago or so, like with the initial SaaS explosion. So the idea that any manager with a corporate card can use a tool, there's a SaaS tool for any particular corporate workflow, and then you end up seeing all these different things get bought out, and then individually versus the CIO's office trying to say, this is what we use and this is how we use it. The still thing, and with SSO technology and trying to centralize everything and getting more options, but within some frameworks, it's been trying to, I wouldn't say it's resolved, but still a thing. But in a market where things are moving so fast, it's really hard to solidify a top-down strategy because for some functions or some individuals, some particular tool might just be better. And so that's a reality, I guess, that you're acknowledging that it's probably coming up now again because the tech's moving so fast, right? And it's possible that
Yeah.
the top-down company initiative tool will have the same functionality 6 months from now, but it might not move fast enough for everyone in the organization. And it's a reality that risk exposure is just whether you do something or not in response to it, it's just a fact for everyone.
Yeah. And so we've been talking a lot about what's the right conversations or the right work to do right now. When we're asked that question, the first place I go is as much as possible looking out to the future and thinking, although, as we've been saying a handful of times, we don't know what the future looks like. Okay, I get that. However, putting a stake in the ground to say, okay, 12 months from now or 24 months from now, what do we know we'll be able to do that we're not able to do right now? And taking off those handcuffs, taking off those guardrails, and being very realistic about the possible is important right now. Just so that teams, small or large, can open up the lines of communication again and kind of acknowledge that's how severe, I'll use the word, and dramatic that new reality is. So once we've done that, then how do we back out of that and really focus on the things that we know we need to do so that people feel as secure as they possibly can in their jobs today? And we can have real conversations about role changes and evolutions, completely new jobs, completely new roles that we may need to have that don't exist today. I can get into some specific examples about that if you're interested.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is a fun one. That point. Well, what jobs might exist or
Yeah.
roles be required? What roles may be required for us to have on our teams that don't exist today? This is a fun one. Just a couple that are just the easy, fun ones is comms tech analyst and say a communications function, having a person, an individual who is responsible for understanding all the different tools, technologies, and applications that exist in the organization and the tech stack. And for the entire digital workplace, that may be an IT thing, but for the communications tech stack in particular, how are we really understanding how to fully optimize what we have? How are we bringing measurement and data together across multiple platforms and technologies and using some of these new tools that we know exist now to develop more accurate reporting more often? And the third thing I'd add, again, being other than being the analyst and other than being responsible for reporting and measurement, is that is also the person who can go into a specific application. I'll use Writer as an example because I've just been talking about this a lot in the last couple of days. Inside Writer, an AI powered platform and tool for not just communicators, for all people at work, I think I saw 800 different applications that exist in the library. Well, who's going to be the person to understand, well, what those 800 applications are and the fact that they're already there and
Mhm.
explore possibilities of how we might want to consider using those applications? That's just one example. Beyond Writer, that's what we're seeing is these AI powered tools are platforms with multiple applications within them. And our teams are going to need to be an expert in terms of what's possible and define that roadmap of how to take full advantage of a platform and start applying it to our business today. That's a role that isn't something a communicator could do off the side of their desk or may not exist today in a traditional IT organization or function. And what I just said, of course, completely applies to HR. And you look at Workday, you look at ServiceNow, you look at Microsoft. Yeah, I can keep going. There's so much duplication and there is so much depth that exists inside these platforms that it's going to require not just one person, but probably a team to fully understand what's possible.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show. This reminds me of how it's been there for decades, but on the HR side, you invest in a platform, even going back to the days pre SaaS of on-prem kind of software, and you have an army of technical folks who are able to configure the software, and then potentially an army of, I don't know, program managers, product managers, process folks who are able to translate the business process and understand what are you actually trying to do on the client side to then configure that into the kind of tool itself. And specifically with HR, that's developed separate from IT, right? Like in HRIS, you have HRIS implementation and consultation as this other function that's kind of grown. But it's true specifically for comms because now it's so rich and multifaceted and deep based on different functions using different comms tools. And there's so much complexity to the workflow layer that there's almost like a, and it could be one person or two people who are just both understanding the processes. What does the exec team want to do? How do you want to communicate? What are the metrics that we need? But also understanding how do you, in this complex, relatively complex UI of a workflow builder, really set the logic so that the right automations are happening, so that things are happening efficiently in the background. I do see those things happening now, both for the people teams and comms teams. I wonder, could that be the communicators or the HR operators or HRGs or HRBPs or internal comm specialists of today? Do you imagine that they are going to go through a reskilling process to do these things that we're talking about? Or is it a completely different kind of type of background that will come into play?
As a serial optimist, and putting that aside, I think the answer is yes. I think that the most obvious evolution or opportunities that exist for, say, a writer or a communicator whose writing skills may not be as valuable not 6 months from now as they have been for the last 60 years.
Yeah.
Yes, that role evolution does include being able to configure, test, align content to a lot of other things. It is absolutely that much more strategic. I feel like there are even more and higher, I think there should be, frankly, expectations for storytelling and creativity using these tools that those people, those writers, are going to really need to employ their creative muscle, right? To ensure that we're now aligning with those applications for creating better content. I don't think it's a complete shift and change for everyone. But again, like we said a few minutes ago, these are the right conversations to have now. Talking about foundational and fundamental roles that exist today, what and how those roles should look and what those people should be doing to be more specific 6 or 9 months and now. That's it's what I'm most concerned about are our organizations that aren't even having these conversations yet. Because that's when we'll start to see the inefficiency and the waste in terms of resources in the coming years, or those that waited too long to begin having some of these conversations and aren't able to do them the right way. And frankly, some people might be losing their jobs because their organizations haven't even opened up the conversation around what they could be doing soon enough.
That could be an organizational kind of cultural kind of thing. But again, there are different markets and there's different context. But what I've seen is that so writing as a skill set, that outcome still matters. Everyone as a knowledge worker, you're writing emails, you're writing Slack and Teams messages, you are communicating constantly, right? Whether it's an IC, obviously like a manager, there's a more high stakes communications that are still happening in writing. And of course, like in HR and comms, it's just that the process to get there is just so much more efficient. And so that by itself is not a skill set that's valued as much. But then if you look at it, for example, an internal comms manager or specialist, what they actually do, writing is one small element of what they do already, even 10 years ago. You have to understand your stakeholders, connect with them, understand what the
Mhm.
priorities are, and then understand at least, okay, how do you have to know how to write and like use an email tool, right? And
Yeah,
there's like a software element to it as well. There's like little automations and notifications people, for the most part, evolve to already, but it just continues apace, right? Is what
yeah.
I guess what we're arguing. But at some point, it might be so much so that there's more of the work is like the writing, the actual writing is 1 to 2% of the work versus everything else around it that we're talking about.
Yeah, and just to finish that thought or add to your thought, the other point that again is obvious is with more, better data faster, strategies will change and evolve faster, which will require more internal communications and socialization of how that shift in strategy is impacting the organization. That's another example of the work that we'll need to continue to do more of that we've been doing a long time because just that aspect of timing and pacing around change is even going to be exacerbated. The rate of change is going to increase, is what I'm saying. And
Right.
we need to wire our organizations in a way that can react and respond to that.
So let's paint a picture for the kind of organization that is leaning into it. I'm curious, and generally the principles that you would think about, where the leadership team sees that there's a big shift coming to their organization, to most functions across the board. They're tuning into the fact that there's some level of fear around it, but also there's a real big opportunity to reskill, and there's a lot going on. And they're coming to you for like a strategy to transform the organization, including the change management element of it. And so we're on this side of the divide, right? So then where do you go from there? Because that still
Yeah.
feels, at least to me, like fuzzy, right? That there's so much to do and so many places you could start. Like, how would you think about breaking that down with a particular client? And also, if you could like think about how you would answer the point that you made earlier, which is that we don't know exactly what the future holds and what it could look like 2 years or many years down the line, but you put some stake in the ground. So how would you go about
Yeah.
helping an organization think through that?
Yeah. Great question. Change is going to be constant. It's going to be at a faster pace than ever. What we know will be also be constant is looking at our kind of the foundational elements of our organizations and the work in a consistent way. So, with the way that we do that is we start first with strategy and strategy and planning, meaning what is our approach? What data do we have to inform business strategy, change management strategy, internal communication strategy? What additional sophistication might we be able to bring to strategy with better, faster, cheaper tools? How can we develop more accurate personas faster? How can we continue to listen to our organization in a way that we know that we are that much more confident in terms of having our sense of the pulse of the concern sets that exist, right? So
Mhm.
strategy and planning is where we go first. Next, systems and process. So that's where we look at, do we have those feedback loops in place? Do we have mechanisms in place that we know will show us what's working and enable more of that, or surface, you know what, this isn't working, we need to course correct. It could be as simple as content approvals, because we're using AI to create content. Who is approving what and how often? That's a real
Right.
specific example. Editorial calendars. If we're able to get better, more accurate concepts and ideas for content that is in line with those preferences or needs that the organization has or audiences have inside our organizations, how do we make sure that we're adapting and evolving the editorial calendar in a way that's in line with that? So,
Hmm.
strategy and planning, systems and process. Of course, there's a lot more that I'd mentioned. Third is skills and capabilities. And this is what we touched on a couple of times in this conversation.
Right.
Are we clearly looking at what skills and capabilities exist on our teams in our organizations today? Have we had the conversation, or have we begun the conversation about what we know we're going to need in the future? And have we begun to start thinking about how are all of our roles, including as leaders, are going to evolve in a way to align with that potential future? So that's third is skills and capabilities. And then, of course, platforms, tactics, and channels and technology. How are we auditing or assessing our existing tech stack? What gaps do we know already exist? What kind of duplication in those systems do we know already exists? How are we defining a technology roadmap that can
Mhm.
also evolve with some of the new platforms or existing platforms that are evolving? How are we thinking about investing our energy in learning those systems and our spend and our budgets for those systems? How are we defining a roadmap so that we can continue to communicate on platforms and channels that are working and are effective and are built to last and evolve? And how are we beginning to sunset, if you will, other channels, platforms, technologies that we know may not be as effective moving forward? So that's what we do, is we look through all four kind of those lenses, if you will. And then once we've illustrated what that work is, then we can feel that much more confident that we're thinking about that change and transformation in a really holistic way. And that we constantly are evolving each of those elements.
That's a wonderful framework. And when you come to the other side of that, how would you think about what you bring and what is important to ask for help for from experts and consultants versus something being important to build a sustainable capability for in-house,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Some of those things you don't need to potentially have a strategy every session, like every 3 months. Like you should hopefully have something, somewhat of a North Star. and then reskilling all the way down on the fourth layer. It's constantly happening. But I wonder if some of these things are moving so fast where it previously made sense to keep it in house, let it go to experts and consultants, or maybe goes the other way because some of these things, it's so important to build I don't know, a muscle in certain sub functions to really make sure that is an in house differentiator. I mean, how do you think about that in this dynamic?
Again, we've said a few times that there's such a wide spectrum of organizations. Again, we work with a lot of higher ed, a lot with some of the biggest enterprise companies and brands in the world. We do a lot of work with very complex multi-employer organizations, associations, government. So we work across a lot of very complex industries. So what's nice about that is we are able to tune in pretty quickly in terms of how much work and at what pace of change. We know higher ed, for example, is going to move a little bit more slowly in terms of change transformation. Sometimes it's as specific as because of budget approvals, right? Like foundationally, those things exist and there's
Right.
a pattern to that.
Yeah, like literally no budget is ever approved outside once a year. And
Exactly.
so,
Very
okay, we won't have
simple.
this in place until at least next year.
Yeah. So there's those mechanisms in place that inform rate of change, frankly, in some organizations versus others. But to your question, in terms of how much of a capability do we build internally
Mhm.
versus what do we ask for help for? What do we bring in a firm like Segal Benz to do? That's a very strategic question. And the answer is going to change. For example, there may be some things that the HR function might want to outsource to experts because of the technology they're using to do that, to complete that task, which we see a lot in HR functions today. Although background checks is a perfect example, right? Like,
Mhm.
why would we do that internally when we can bring in a firm for that? We're not going to need to spend on translation anymore, for example, because that's all built in and it's
Right.
better than ever. So, the first question is, what does the strategy look like? What needs to change and when? And the next question, of course, is what capabilities might we want to build because we know that over time there will be value in having those internally? Or I think we talked about in another conversation when all of our clients are answering the question of do we have a bandwidth issue and a capacity issue to get something done? We don't? Okay, great. Let's bring in some help. Do we have a
Mhm.
capability gap? Do we want to build that internally or not? And if we do, let's build it or not. We'll budget and bring in someone to do that work for us. Does that work require a specific expertise, for example? Oh, our third, we don't want to forget is just risk transfer. Oh, if we hire someone else
Sure.
to do it, then the risk for us is going to be a little bit less potentially. And there's
Right.
a lot more value in the speed at which another vendor or partner could get something done versus the risk it might take for us to try to get it done if it takes longer. We're brought in. It's a different answer, frankly, to your question for any organization. But
Of course.
yeah,
I
we
guess,
need
like
to.
for an uninitiated and an organization in an industry and with an exec team that is relatively not like tech savvy, like those factors could converge to getting outside help, right? Both outside help who have expertise with certain tools and also can get you things evolved faster and implemented faster and outcomes faster, as well as, of course, the capability to do so is just literally not in the team to
Yeah,
begin with, and the built-in protection that this come from experts who've done this other places. And if it fails here, it's their fault, not ours.
yeah.
Even though we didn't. But so it feels like there's a mix depending on what kind of content and the type of engagement, of course. But I was thinking maybe there's some things in an HR, comms, IT kind of function, like you want to have that as part of the beating heart of the organization, like some skill sets, like just, I don't know,
Yeah.
you want to have someone who's, okay, I don't know, you're someone who is curating and editing and pushing out the company newsletter. We want to have that be in-house because we want that person to be breathing the culture. I don't know. Like we want to have at least one person who is this like AI focused experimenter on staff because we want to have that kind of like start to seep into our culture. Right? So the real decisions that are made, we're placing bets on the organization itself and bringing some of that skill set internally. Let me ask one last question, although it's a very broad one, if you don't mind. We
Mhm.
talked a little bit about internal comms specifically, but what does a future ready HR team look like across communications, tech, operations? You put it all together. Where do you see this evolving?
That's a great question. I like the way you asked it. What does a future ready team? We need to see in a future ready team. There's the easy answer, is which a level of openness and curiosity and permission, for, as I said earlier, to be curious and ask good questions or dumb questions all the time. So I think that being open to test, learn, and fail, and therefore being curious, is a number one. That sets the expectation for role changes, evolutions in the right way. So, to be even more specific, I think that it requires a leader who sees both, of course, the broad strategy, that change that's required, and also acknowledges and sees, for lack of a better word, the day to day experiences each individual on their team has and is able to really coach and partner the right way. The short answer is a future ready team needs to be wired for change. I mean, that there's no question. And if there is something that exists that it might be concerning about being prepared or not being wired for change, that those are the things that need to be addressed immediately, because that's one thing that we know to be true. Whether we're talking about AI tools or tech or not, our world and the world of work is going to be changing at a more rapid pace.
So let's all get prepared for that. I love it. Preston, so while we wrap up here, how can people best follow your work or connect with you?
So I like to think I'm one of the easiest people to find in the world. LinkedIn is always great. Again, just search for my name or search Preston Lewis, Segal Benz. I try to respond to as much as possible. So either follow me through LinkedIn, or you can easily send me an email at plewis@segalbenz.com. But please do. If there's anything that anybody would like to add to or further questions you might have, I can chat.
Love it. Thank you so much for the chat, Preston. We covered a lot of ground at the highest level with this mindset gap that I think I agree with you. We're both seeing around people are leaning in versus sitting out, and how that seems to be growing a wider and could be concerning for some organizations, but depending on the context and the industry that you're in. And then I love how we dove in really deep into internal communications and how that particular function could be evolving and yet stay relevant in the midst of all this change. And we both said the future is hard to predict, and also did our best to predict it. So I appreciate the conversation. And to everyone out there, keep future proofing your organizations, and let's figure out a way to all thrive in the age of AI. See you on the next one.
See you
Bye
next
now.
time. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Proof HR. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're listening to or watching us on. Or share this with a friend or colleague who may find value in the message. See you next time as we keep our pulse on how we can all thrive in the age of AI. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.